Eve, all right?
Yeah.
Okay, what can everybody see? That's the question. Should be a PowerPoint, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go to that. I'll start at the end. All right, Ryan, show me your screen. Let's have a look. Perfect. Okay. Okay, folks. So, welcome to tonight's staff meeting. I promised Eve that I would show my face and support this process of CPD, and actually, I'm very interested to see what comes out of it, and take feedback, and watch how you implement what we talk about. So, this is dedicated time. It's ring fenced for our learning, and I'll talk more about that in the moment. So, Eve, I'm going to be about 10 minutes, I think now. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
As discussed, but I've flashed up some provocative questions that at the end of tonight's focus, which is attention and Marge, I think it's important that we ask ourselves these questions. Now, I'm not expecting you to answer them tonight, but I do think that if you're not asking yourself these questions, not just rhetorically, but actually thinking through how you might answer them personally or in your teams or both, I think we're missing the power of these dedicated learning sessions. So I've preempted what I would be asking myself, and I hope they're helpful. I'll come back to those in a moment. Before I start, tonight's, I'll leave the questions on for a minute, so apologies, you have to listen to me and look at those. But tonight's session, I want there's some synergy between tonight. In fact, not just synergy, it's absolute clarity in how it links in terms of the content and the concept tonight of margin attention with exactly how we need to operate in our Zoom meetings. Zoom, without question for me, for something like this is fantastic because I don't have to be even in the building. Like I'm at Mayflower now, but I could be anywhere in the world, couldn't I? And that's been very helpful in my role. But actually, I know you'll be feeling like me that some of the Zoom staff meetings, some of your Zoom courses, some of your Zoom contact with colleagues and friends outside school too is becoming a bit of a weary process. We feel fatigued with the Zoom process, the Zoom framework, the Zoom format, or obviously today I mean Teams. That's an important thing to recognise, because I guess in some ways, without wanting to be too well, I don't want to insult anyone, but actually that's no different to the children and how they might be feeling fatigued at times in the process of learning for themselves too. So I'm very much coming to the table today. I'm going to deliver some thinking, and then I'm going to take the role of learner, and I will be fatigued at points with having to focus and look at a screen and attend. Eve, you're doing some work on attending and motivation, and Marge, and I think we could all agree tonight, please, that a Teams, a Zoom, a remote approach isn't the easiest of things to work with at the end of a really long day and at the start of a new term. So there's a recognition from me that you might be finding this process hard on Wednesdays. There's a recognition from me that I want to say thank you to the hard work that's gone into trying to make the sessions useful and interactive. But there's also recognition from me for you, please, to act on that. Unless you focus on some of the things that Eve talks about in ourselves as learners during these sessions, we won't be able to fully get the best out of these sessions. We won't be able to dedicate our attention, and therefore we won't be motivated to take the learning that we're going through now forward. So forgive us for the format, modern COVID world, but also be kind to yourself and give yourself the best chance as you can at the end of a long day to be able to attend to learning. It's good to see YFS here tonight. Look, they're all sat around together, and it's nice to see that, and the cameras are on, and actually we are fully engaged in this, because there's nothing easier than multitasking. Penny, only today didn't we witness something going on in training and you were multitasking? Yesterday I was on a very long course, I had to multitask, but this one we need to come together and dedicate to learning together. So more on that in a moment. I just want to start by setting the framework of our approach for the next 10 weeks around teaching, learning and assessment. In particular, 10 weeks, it's actually 11 weeks left, but 10 weeks including starting next week, for us as adults, as learners, and in particular, a focus on the Academy Improvement Plan. So the Academy Improvement Plan is big. It was written before COVID came along, and it's been tweaked as COVID has come and gone. Still partially with us, of course, taking that very seriously. But it needs to be owned by the school. I'm still part of that process. I'm still accountable. I'm still responsible. But Sarah and Penny, Malt, but also every member of staff needs to find their place in the next 10 weeks to help us make judgments on three things: the quality of teaching, the quality of learning, and the quality of assessment. That is what we need to report on. And if we must mention things like governing bodies and boards and Ofsted, we can. But actually, it's not about them. It's about the fact that by the end of this academic year, we would have learnt a huge amount about how to teach, learn, and assess more effectively, more efficiently. I'm hugely proud of the whole profession. If I may be proud of a profession, who am I to do that? But I'm hugely proud of us as staff for the transformation that you've all made collectively as well as individually around your use of remote learning and around your ability to transform your skill sets overnight. I'm just in awe of it, actually. We've done some amazing work together as a team, and take a moment to reflect on that over the summer, how far you've actually come, because you'll blow your mind. That said, COVID is beyond us, behind us in terms of getting a sense of teaching, learning, assessment excellence now. So how do we take the learning we've gone through or made over COVID? How do we now move into this period of what I would call recovery, where we've got to be kind to each other, we've got to be compassionate, and understand that we need to look at systems that across the school that might enable us to function better as teachers and as learners. So, excellence in teaching, learning, assessment, what will that mean? We'll find out in the next 10 weeks. That's our focus as a leadership team, more on that at Malt, and more on that in class very soon. And catch up and a review of our wider services will be the two other areas that we'll focus on the next 10 weeks, with or without you. And when I mean without you, I mean it might be something that goes on in an office as opposed to writing on a Wednesday night. The next area that we're going to focus on will be Trivium, and pupils are guided by you as leaders of this process, as they move towards having a justification of opinion. And we didn't highlight this and pay huge attention to this during COVID, but we are this 10 weeks because Trivium underpins our planning, our delivery, and assessment. I'll talk about that in depth in a moment. Teachers, we want you to be able to understand that process by modelling it. And part of the work that he's talking about around the portfolios, presentations that we're going to create, is about showing an awareness of that process and enabling us to check for understanding. So as you present, we'll check in with those. What have you understood around the content, in particular around the next 10 weeks? The audit, we'll be able to audit the impact of CPD to date. We know that's been interrupted during COVID. We've done well to keep anything going, quite frankly, so very well done. And we'll use that to write the new ARP moving forward, and also the new systems that will enable you to have continued professional development moving forward too. I'm excited about that. So I think it's a huge piece of work we can do there. It could be quite innovative. We'll also use that for inset and induction for new staff, new TAs, etc. And we will audit the Trivium as a framework for assessment, not just from a pupil perspective, but from teachers' perspective. So stick with this because there's a lot in there that's very, very meaty, and it's going to take a very focused approach over the next 10 weeks to pull all those outcomes out of our work. So Eve will clarify the expectation around the presentations, but those presentations are intended to achieve the A, B, the C, and the D. That is what it's intended to do. Not just, we could add an E, about deepen your understanding of a certain area. It's more about understanding the process that pupils are going to go through by going through it yourself. Hopefully, you can see the worth in that. From a CPD perspective, what are we doing? We're moving as phases from a theory into practice and making improvements via these areas: Marge, feedback, and questioning. So your presentations, unless you're in support centre who need to be able to clarify their intent, and Penny understands where we're coming from on that. There's a curriculum that Danielle's writing with Kelly and the team. We need to understand we've got that in place ready for September, so we're all vulnerable, including the pupils. Unless you're in the early years that have a brand new curriculum to understand the intent, and Carly will talk more about this in terms of cross-school work around the implementation, the how we teach. Unless you're those two blocks, so if you're red, blue, and green, we want you to understand more about Marge, feedback, and questioning. Choose one of those areas and present on it so that we have the A, B, C, and D above achieved. What are we going to do around innovation? Should be bolded out, that word. Well, we're going to develop those tools that help us create learning and remember forever. This is something I've talked to Sarah and Penny and Helen about, that I'm going to be working very, very hard, both in school and at my desk, if you like, around understanding what the heck we mean by creating learning and remember forever. What does we mean by it? What does it look like on a day-to-day practice? What does it mean to the pupils? And how can we test that we're actually doing that? We're taking that statement very, very seriously. It's brandished in our Mac. It's the only statement you'll see kicking about, and the only other one that we referenced from our vision work that we did in September will be create leadership and learning good enough to share. We're doing that, and more on that in September as we work across 2 schools. Just going back to the innovation wise, we're going to define more on the tools in a minute. We need to be absolutely crystal clear on what tools we've designed, whether that's a LAT or whether that's you as an individual, whether that's Mayflower, and we need to be proving now that those things are having the right impact that we expect. So adults as learners continue tactics. These are things that you might want to in time be aware of and use to support your ability to get learning and remember forever, to increase the effectiveness of teaching, learning and assessment. 4 C's, 5 R's, try teaching terms, but they are not the be all and end all. They are not the theories, they are the tactics, the methods that we might use to engage our learners and each other in more effective learning ourselves. So I've just done the tools. So that's what we're doing over the next 10 weeks. And that will hopefully give you a sense in particular around CPD, where tonight's Marge piece of CPD sits in relation to the rest of the academic year, but in particular, this recovery period after we come out the other side of what was pretty horrific for COVID, in terms of our own self-esteem, well-being and workload, that we salvage over the next 10 weeks some high quality outcomes and some reports around what's our effectiveness in these different areas. So before we move into Eve's PowerPoint, I'm going to walk you through a framework for approaching teaching, learning and assessment in terms of theory now. So I'm moving from what we're doing over the next 10 weeks into the theory that you will see Eve's PowerPoint tonight, the content of that will sit inside what I'm talking about within this framework. Up to you to decide where, but we'll come to that. And I may cold call in a moment, if I may, figure out how to see everyone on the same screen. That'd be great. Ryan, I might need to ask you to come and sit next to me because I can see everyone on Ryan's screen. So you will be familiar already with these headings. Let's spend a few minutes, Eve, just unpicking these, which will make Marge feedback, questioning, fit really clearly and neatly inside each one. So the theory of generative learning, or learning being a generative activity, is built on 3 things. And a learner being able to select an area to focus on, a concept, a skill, for them to organize all their theory and practice of how to not just memorize that concept and all the thinking behind it, but also practice, make sense of, make links between, to be able to integrate. So the whole process of SOI, select, organize and integrate, is built across all areas of what we're going to talk about today. It's not a standalone, it's not a 3-step thing. It can be, but it's across all of these 3 areas. And these 3 areas are the trivium areas that we can absolutely use to exemplify an expert, a novice, or as I prefer to say, novice to expert continuum. So this framework here in front of you, this table, will begin to fill up with content in a minute, and I want you to take really close note of each of those 3 rows, if you like: grammar, dialectic and rhetoric, which we are rephrasing for the children as being able to recall something, key facts, key knowledge, key theory. To be able to then, instead of dialectic, we're talking about being able to question and explore that knowledge, to then move on, not to rhetoric necessarily, but to communicate that knowledge, and more on that in a moment. So this is, from now on, this document, this table, is going to show how knowledge is transferred between people. You've seen this before, and if you haven't, this is fundamental to everything that we've built our leadership mechanisms for moving forward on, but in particular the way you're going to plan, deliver and assess learning. So here we are, same thing, but we've got some people in this one. As you'll see in the top row, we have an adult, because they're tall. We're all tall, aren't we, adults? That's right, Ryan, we're okay. and a pupil. So the fundamental concept to grasp around this and sign up to is the fact that the adult is the expert and the pupil is the novice. Now, of course, there are scenarios when that is not the case. We understand that, but in principle, the first stage of a learning, say sequence of learning, maybe 12 weeks, or even within a lesson, will be the adult has something to offer, and they transfer that something to offer, that knowledge, to the novice, the pupil, the learner. Now, after that stage, we move to the dialectic, where the adult takes a different role. More on that in a moment, and the pupils take a different role. They no longer focus on being able to select, recall what the concept is or the knowledge is that's being taught from the adult. They now move to being able to question and explore on that. More on that in a moment. And finally, the power, the energy shifts from it at the beginning of the sequence being from an adult giving to a pupil or adult expert to novice, to the novices themselves inquiring, questioning, exploring, and the adult playing a different role around checking for understanding. Finally, now to the pupil owning that knowledge, having an opinion, an educated opinion. Martin Robinson talks about not informed, educated. We have educated them in a curriculum. It's our decision how we ring fence that curriculum for them. It's not just random. And they then tell us and communicate what it is that they have an opinion on now, what they've learned. Martin talks about those 3 stages having 3 really clear headings. The first stage is being the grammar is about I recall. Then it's we question and explore. And finally, you, I tell you, I communicate with you, and I affect you, I impact on you with my opinion. I make you think differently. So let's take each one of those very quickly. You like my drawing, by the way? Very quickly in isolation. So let's focus on the start of a sequence of learning, and let's look at this adult, this expert, focusing their attention on grammar. In other words, I've got to help the children understand something, some knowledge, and therefore I have to take the approach. My behavior, has to be modeling. What do I model? Well, the tactic I might use for that will be I need to understand if there's a systematic approach. I have to talk about this is the systematic approach. I need to model that to them. It's not a guessing game. I haven't got time for that. So therefore, I am directly instructing them. I need to explain to them that part of this process to help them reference what we're learning about and make links, I might get them to revisit. And interestingly, you could draw an arrow going the other way if you're revisiting. You set the quiz or the challenge, the test, whatever it might be, the experience, and then the pupil will actually tell you what they know. So the arrow could go the other way on that one, but generally you are setting the conditions for that learning. And the tick in the cross for me references, you show them what is expected and what isn't. You show them what knowledge looks like and what the opposite looks like. So you're saying black looks blacker against white. You don't just show them black, you show them white, and black stands out more. So correct, not correct. Do you understand the difference? Okay. Now, interestingly, you would say, yep, Dave, we know that. We instruct all day long, every day. We know when to do that. But what would happen if you started a new piece of learning and you started with inquiry and you didn't model? Well, that would be inquiry-based learning. And that has its place too. But you'd need to make that decision in your planning. Generally, we've got expert knowledge. We need to transfer it over to the pupils. We've planned a progressive and sequence curriculum. And in that, it begins with some form of direct instruction. Now, interestingly, if the behavior of the expert at the first stage of grammar, of modeling, is to direct instruct, you need to know what the most effective forms of direct instruction are, or modeling is. Well, more on that as CPD as we go through this next year. What does a pupil do? Well, their behavior should be listening to be able to attend. So he's going to talk about attention tonight, attending to learning. One of the most fundamental factors in attending to learning is the ability to listen. How many of us have taught our children to listen? Have we studied that enough? And if I was walking through a classroom, through a corridor, and I happen to know that you were at the stage of grammar, of modeling, what behavior, how would I know that the children were behaving appropriately to be effective learners? I would need to see listening. I'd need to hear listening. Can you hear listening? Well, you can hear when they're not listening, maybe. Okay, so we need to understand more about the theory of listening. We need to teach those skills to children, and we need to praise them through the roof when they do that. One of the things we might want to consider around tactics is we need to teach children to take notes. You'll see at the opposite ends of this table, I've left tools out, because what I'd like you to do at some point is either have this individually as a piece of reference, as a guide, and I'd like and fill out what tools you think will be used at that point. Or I might cold call in a minute and just ask you to just tell me what you think when we've gone through it all. So be thinking, what tools that Mayflower has or that I use in class would I be implementing at the point at which we're talking about grammar, in order for a child to select the knowledge that we're focusing on, the concept maybe, to listen and attend. So the next stage, we can speed up a bit now. We'll move on to dialectic. It's not about I as the expert, it's about we as the learners, the novices. And it's a collaborative piece. So the first would be an individualized, very focused piece of learning, attending to learning. I'm in the right place, I'm fed, I'm watered, I'm not still hot from lunchtime, you know, I'm ready to learn. Now I'm moving on to we. I've got to collaborate with people. Do we teach the skills of collaboration? Well, without that, this phase falls flat on its face as you make the transition from one to the other. Teacher captures, corrects, and celebrates. The most fundamental part of leadership, in my opinion, once something's been modelled, and definitely for inquiry-based learning, is having formats, methods for capturing. iPad is perfect for that. Social visualizer, social voice, so's holding a book up, so's exemplifying something on the board, drawing it out, questioning a child. But you're correcting at that point too. You're not just letting the child question, explore, practice as a we incorrectly, because that will embed the wrong habits, the wrong networks in the brain. You are allowing mistakes to happen, but not catastrophic ones. So if the teacher is capturing, correcting, and celebrating, or the leader, I would argue, then guess what the pupil's doing? Well, they are questioning, exploring, they're comparing and contrasting, and one of the tactics we might use is the ability to be able to debate. Well, in order to debate, they better have some knowledge to debate about. So we better have done a good job of the modelling phase. Our role as experts is to check for understanding. Eve's talked to us hugely about and we will do some work on questioning, possibly reframing. Hence why we want to know, within this next 10 weeks, one of your blocks at least will be asked to present what they know and what they've tried, what they've questioned and explored about checking for understanding, in particular questioning. And you'll frame your presentation in these three headings: the grammar, the dialect, and the rhetoric. We'll use modelling. Model and define what you know about questioning. Question and explore it. What have you done in class? How have you played around with it? Now rhetoric. Now communicate with us. Declare and share what you've learned and what you're going to do different in the future. Hopefully that explains what the presentation needs to look like. Very simple, drag and drop stuff you're already doing. And Ellie talked at Molt about some of the ways she's doing that with some work already in her blog, which was really exciting. Final stage, rhetoric, our ability to communicate. We often talk about declaring, sharing, justifying. Our justification of opinion would be one of the tools we'd use here for a child to be able to present or perform, especially if it's a skill-based piece of knowledge or learning, a procedural skill we'd want to perform. What does a teacher do? What does the expert do? Well, there might be more than one of them now, because it might be about having an expert that isn't the teacher in the room, because we're communicating what we've learned about our DT, our art, our history, our geography. In time, Sarah and I hope we can get closer to the project-based learning approach in this area for this strand, the rhetoric strand, the U, where we are presenting our learning, communicating it, performing it to people who need to see it, people who are experts in that field, people we are trying to change the minds of, the meaningful bit in our curriculum planning that we're yet to develop to its full capacity. Teachers, experts, they'd listen, they'd compare against the systematic approach that they created at the start, they'd feed back. They would create a judgment, they'd make an assessment for learning judgment based on the brief that was set at the beginning of that piece of planning. So there it is as a whole. You just had the parts. I'd like you to consider some of the tools. They're obvious. It's not a trick question. You've been developing them. You can have a think about them, but let's not move too far away from knowledge organizers, graphic organizers, tiered vocabulary as three of the main: justification of opinion, clarification of thinking. These are tools that you use to achieve this process I'm arguing. You might not have thought of them or being joined up in that way, but wouldn't it be lovely to drop them into the right row and have that debate as teachers? Hopefully this framework makes that easy. So back to these questions, and we'll open it up to the floor if it allows at the end of the presentation, because I don't want to get in the way any more of Eve's work. But you can see what we're trying to achieve with the presentations now. You can see where that sits in relation to the clarity you need around the trivium process as a way of delivering on the selecting, organising and integrating methodology or theory of learning as a generative activity. And these questions will absolutely enable you to be better teachers if you can answer them. And I think the first question, the first bullet point, I think is very poignant. What from anything I've just said tonight, be polite, be kind, will make you change or tweak your approach to your next piece of planning, whether that's the next session you deliver, whether that's the next scheme of work you're designing, or immersing yourself in if it's a scheme that's already built. So hopefully that will shape, I guess, the container, the framework in which Eve's very detailed or very specific piece of training now, Marge, will drop itself into. It has a place to fall and land where it can be made sense of. So hopefully that is useful. It's useful for me. I totally understand it if I look at it this way. So I'm going to finish this show now, Eve. Is there anything you'd like me to say in addition to that you can think I've missed, or that you, if not, just crack on. Just please do. Over to you. Okay.
Thank you. No, I think that's great, because Dave's explanation now will really help everybody to understand the background to what we're going to be learning about in a moment. So I'll just share my screen.
Eve, it might be worth, has anyone got, while you're doing that, anyone got any questions so they don't get left to, and even if we don't answer them now, they're just sort of getting logged next to me. Has anyone got any questions about anything I've just said? It might be picked up in a minute, but please don't go quiet if you have, because that's not going to help, or pop them in the chat. Okay. EYFS is still doing their yoga. Oh no, it's not EYFS. It's Red Block. Hello, hi Jess. Okay, over to you now, Eve. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. So on to our second session of Marge. So today we're talking about attending and relating. So this slide is just a quick one for you to remind yourselves about what we did last week when we talked about Shimomura's Marge model, but the motivation strand. So I'll just give you a second to read this slide from the walkthroughs. So before we move on to the next part about attending and relating, is there any feedback about the motivation slides that we learned last week? Did anybody try anything? Did anybody think back about their planning, their storytelling sequences? Is there anything that anybody would like to feed back, please? It would be really helpful. If so, just unmute yourself. No, oh, I'll ask some people. Dan, what about you? What do you think from last week?
Yeah, so something that we've done in year 3 with the writing planning is we've looked at mystery stories, and we've tried to create our own mystery story in the classroom. I've taken a photo of the classroom being overturned and looking quite messy. That's the surprise event. So it's relevant to the children. They were quite excited about that. I got them very, very curious, and they're looking forward to writing a beautiful mystery story, looking at the suspects, with the suspects being the teachers from Blue Block.
Yeah, so I had a look to see what year 3 were doing, and it was a great great planned session that they were doing that really motivated, excited the pupils. They couldn't wait to see what was happening. But the way that Dan had planned it was so clear. It was a proper storytelling sequenced. It was great. It showed progression throughout, and looking forward to seeing the outcomes at the end. Thank you, Dan. Anybody from Red Block, could you feedback, please, what you learnt and took away from last week's session?
Hi.
Hi.
So year one, it's kind of a fairly embedded approach that we use anyway. And so the sequence we're doing at the moment in English is a finding story. So we have deliberately chosen one that doesn't have words. It's a wordless story, so that the children are crafting their own story based on the pictures in there, and we've broken it down into the separate sections for it. So we've kind of gained their interest in something that's familiar to them. Beaches are familiar, but the actual story itself is a story of Flotsam, where it's got these fantastical worlds under the sea that actually don't have a description. So they have to, think of their own description for it, think of their own story that's going on there. And it seems to have hooked quite well. We've broken it down to sort of the year one approach of beginning, middle and end of the story, giving them a couple of days to write each section. And actually in 2 days, some of mine have just been so enthralled by it, they've written the whole story. So we're now on the redrafting stage of that.
Great and fantastic. Wonderful for vocab development as well, Nathan.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Anybody from Green, please?
Hi, Eve. So we were just saying in year 5, we did our project launch. So we introduced them to our question, but then we also were asking them for their initial views on our question of whether they'd rather live in Brazil or England. And we just gave them like a brief glimpse of some of the Brazilian culture. So we did a bit of samba dancing. We looked at like some of the food stuff and things. So that actually really stimulated their curiosity and also like focusing on their emotional responses to it.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. And in year 4, like everybody else, we started doing our art this week. And it was amazing because when I modelled to the children what we were doing and we went through it, they remembered everything that they'd done in year 3 that they'd built upon. And so it was great. We got such quality discussions out of it because they were able to build on their prior knowledge. And it was so important. And so we went through and we watched videos of experts doing it because, of course, we can't have anyone in really at the moment. And it was just really interesting. And they were thrilled. They can't wait for the next session because they want to see because we showed them their picture of their collaborative Play-Doh, the type of work that they'll be doing at the end. And they can't wait to get to that point. And it was just great to know that the sequence has been so carefully planned that each session, I think, will be just as motivating as the first one. So it was really great. Anyone from Yellow Block, please?
Hello.
Hi.
A part of our project, we've been exploring colour, primary and secondary colour, and we started looking at the text mouse paint, and we did a story map, and we've introduced Makaton, so to get that vocab enriched for them to start discussing, and the colour mixing of the primary colours to make secondary colours. It's just been really inspiring for them to come into us and tell us what they've been doing and doing at home. They've been going home and telling their parents. So yeah.
I would imagine from that as well, with the colours, you could get quite a lot of emotive language out from them, and those big things in there that we were talking about last week.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I can see that they were motivated. I've seen parents on Twitter talking about it, which is always about things.
They've been really excited, and we've, embedded that into our CIP. So it's been really enriched. The environment's been really enriched. So yeah, it's been really good.
So that's great. Thank you. So today we're going to move from the motivation, still keeping that in mind because it's so interlinked, and we're moving on to attend and relate. And so on this slide here, the walkthroughs very quickly summarise it. Just try and remember where it says the 3 C's. That's really quite important to the next few slides, please. and then on to relate, because they're so interlinked.
Eve, could you just go back to the previous slide second? We didn't finish reading it. Thank you.
Just tell me when you're ready and I'll flip.
We're done, thank you.
Lovely.
Yeah. And then this is relate. So we just have to remember about Marge. Marge is slightly different because it's very conceptual. So we just have to bear that in mind as we're going. So, but it's conceptual, but it also fits so beautifully with what Dave was just talking about with the SOI model and the trivium throughout. So hopefully you'll see the links as we go through the other slides. Is everybody ready? Can I move on? Yeah, Sarah, you ready? So,
Yeah.
Thank you. Here are 4 key questions that I would just like you to think about now. And then we're going to ask them again at the end of the presentation and see if your ideas have changed, basically. So I'll give you a minute to jot them down and have a chat about them in your teams. Is about another 2 or 3 minutes okay with everyone? I can't see anyone, by the way, so if you could just give me a yes or a no, because I can't see anyone.
A couple of minutes is great, thanks.
Pardon?
A couple of minutes would be great.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to just quickly collect some answers so we can compare at the very end. So, Becky, do you want to look at question 1 for me, please?
So we said when a child enters the classroom, they should first meet a smiley and positive teacher with a can-do attitude. They should walk in and immediately see any models and images up on the walls, on the learning walls, which will have misconceptions from the previous day as well displayed on. And they'll also have all the prepared resources so they can quickly access.
Yeah, fab. Thank you. Let's have a look. I don't know. Somebody from Green, would you like to look at question 2 for us, please?
So we mentioned Eve about, hopefully you can hear me, I'm a little bit far away. So we talked about maybe having stimulus of the chimes to get the children's attention at the start of the lesson, just being at the front of the board, making sure that the lesson preparation is ready to go, and then just getting your point across to the children early doors. Not starting until all children are looking at you and quiet, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Yellow, do you want to have a look at, in fact, no, sorry, we'll go to red for this one. Question 3, please.
We talked about how, particularly in Key Stage 1, if a child is experiencing like overload information, we see that very visually. So they might start shuffling on the carpet or looking around, and my class particularly get very overexcited when we're learning about something new. So we do something called a reset, so I say, okay, we're going to reset. So I sit at the front and I kind of cross my legs, take a deep breath and put my hands in the basket, and then they copy and it resets us, and then I start again. They are a little bit wild. So I reset them. That's something how we do that.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. We were just saying as well, some signs are often like when the children start saying they need to go to the toilet often, sharpening pencils, things like that. It's a behaviour change, isn't it? And Yellow, what about the last question?
Sorry, it's a support centre. We're being Yellow.
Okay.
We said maintaining the child's attention is thinking about your pace, tone of your voice, the type of work you are doing and the style, the personalisation, the differentiation, the small steps, etc.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. If we just keep those questions in mind while we're going through, please. So the next thing, I just want you to notice, well, see what you do notice about this, if you notice anything at all. So it's just a little thing. You need to just practice your breathing. So you just need to close your eyes and really focus on your breathing just for a few seconds. Okay, now I want you to continue to keep breathing, but this time I want you to be pressing your feet into the floor as hard as you can while you continue to focus on your breathing, please. Okay, and you can stop now. Okay, so just wondering, did you notice anything? Was there any difference with your attention, with your breathing? What did you notice?
I couldn't focus on the breathing and the pushing my feet into the floor. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, it was really hard, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. So Dan, Becky were just saying they couldn't focus on the
2 things at once.
Yeah, the breathing and pushing the feet into the floor. Doing the 2 things at once. Anybody else feel the same? Same?
Yeah, we did in Green.
We can do both.
Yeah.
I held my breath.
Yeah, focused on the
that.
Yeah. So it's just a little silly bit of fun, but hopefully as we go through, you'll see why we did that. So the next thing, so now we're going to talk about the makeup. So this is just really quickly talking about our bodies basically and how our brain works. So this is just a bit of information for you. So you have to imagine that your brain is like the orchestra. So the orchestra obviously has many different parts, and they all have to work together to so it's not a horrific noise that is made. And the conductor would be the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and he would or she would control the volume, the timing, and the rhythm, and bring it all together. So the prefrontal cortex is just what we're going to look at for this second. So here it is. On the left, you can see a scan picture of the brain basically, and PFC shows you where the prefrontal cortex is, and then the dorsal path and the ventral path are leading in. So if I just let you have a look at this for a moment. And the prefrontal cortex is the key area in our brain that helps us with attending and motivation, but attention to our learning. Now it says there about top-down processing. I'll explain top-down processing to everybody in a few slides. It's just important that we know where the behaviours are coming from and how our body works, basically. And so very quickly, let's have a look at mind wandering. There's a little fact there from Shimomura, who remember Shimomura is the person who wrote Marge in 2013. And just really, I won't ask for feedback for this, but there's one critical time for focusing attention. When do you think it is? It's obviously the first 4 or 5 minutes of a lesson. I'll just let you read the quote there again from Shimomura a few years later in 2018. And again, it talks about what we were talking last week, talking about the big picture, the big question, really getting the emotions, going back into prior knowledge, making things real to them, thinking about the context of the learning. So just a question at the bottom, how can we ensure we're prepped and ready for the first 5 minutes of a session? And we need to think back, the answer is within our 4 C's. So we need to make sure that we've got the can-do attitude in place, we've got the class plan, the curriculum is sorted, and obviously how we communicate, the communication that's happening in the class. And one of the suggestions from Shimomura, and I spent a long time yesterday and the few days before whilst I was prepping this, really looking into research behind attending learning, sorry. And one of the things that is coming up constantly is talking about how we should be going back to context and prior learning at the very beginning of every session that we do. And so we have a great tool to do that, don't we? We have our graphic schemas, our graphic organisers that we've worked so hard to develop. And we're now all getting pretty good at using these. And so it's just really important that we use these for as many subjects as we possibly can. At the beginning of the lesson, flash through, talk about it. What do we know about this? Let's add to it together as a class. And really get the attention at the beginning of the lesson. Those first 4 to 5 minutes are so crucial. And there was some research that was done as well about the first 4 to 5 minutes. It was children, I think, that were older. I think they were in secondary. But basically, they did some kind of neuroscientific research with them. And those children that didn't fully attend within the first 4 to 5 minutes, in a 50-minute session, their attention was going up and down and up and down, and they were using lots of distraction tactics. They were asking to go to the toilet, shuffling up, down, talking, whereas the children that were really focused in the first 4 to 5 minutes and were joining in were the ones that had a relatively calm lesson and were attending throughout. So it's just really important that we go back to what we all know, start with the prior knowledge, context, and let's get the children hooked and excited about what they're learning without going over the top and making them experiences that the children are having a great time. It's a great experience, but they just remember what they did, but they don't know why they've done it. So it's a careful balance that we need to do. So this one here, how are we going to sustain the attention whilst learning? So we know that the first 4 to 5 minutes are crucial, but then what happens? An interesting quote there, and that's basically about what Ollie Cavaliglioli is always saying to us as well. There's a lot more, it's not just visual, we need to make sure that that information gets lost, doesn't it? It's transient unless you can see it, you can hear it, you can read it. So we need to be thinking about that. But I'm now going to introduce to you a little bit about top-down learning. And top-down learning talks about how basically our brains, when we learn, we make the schemas. Remember Ollie talked about schemas to us, didn't he? And that's where we use our graphic organizers. And the schemas make very clear links. So we have almost patterns. We know how certain things work because that is the pattern that we're used to. Our brains understand that pattern, we know it, and so therefore that's what we do. And that's great. For most of the time, we can apply these patterns to certain things. They're adaptable and it's fantastic. So sometimes, for example, here, if you get an iPhone, an Apple product, you get an iPhone, we could give you an iPad. I don't know about the iWatches, but you could have all the different Apple products, the Mac, and you would basically have an understanding of how it works on a basic level, at least, because you understand the pattern that Apple have. However, you feel happy and content with that. But one day you might drop your phone and that Apple product might be broken, and you might end up getting, for example, a Samsung flip phone. And it's something completely new. And all those patterns that you've learnt have now gone out of the window because Samsung and Apple are very different. And just being a flip is completely different to having an iPhone. And so all the schemas, all the patterns, all the links that you've made would be completely blown out of the water. And so that's, if you think of that in a child, when we're introducing new things, they think they know the pattern, and then we throw a curveball in and it's like, whoa, I'm not sure what's happening. And so we really have to make our teaching extremely clear so that at these points where this happens, we are maintaining the motivation and the attending, and we're relating it to things, we're making clearer links. And so that leads us on to top-down learning shown through the SOI model that Dave was talking about at the beginning of this session. So the selecting, the organising and the integrating. And you can see down the left-hand side there where it says pictures and words. Think about Ollie and him, Ollie Cav, sorry, and him talking about the transient effect of if you just hear words without pictures or words, it doesn't mean anything. If you just have a look there, how we select the information, we organize it into, that goes into our working memory. It's integrated. It also fits with the prior knowledge. And then that is how we retain. That's the long-term memory. And that is part of the generative learning. So the SOI model. So this runs throughout. I'll just leave it for a second so you can have a look. And there's a nice quote that goes alongside it. I'll just let you read that. So hopefully Now you're beginning to see how the select, organise and integrate fits with the motivation and the attending and the relating. So you hopefully now, after Dave's introduction, you can see it's like a jigsaw, how it all slots together in the big teaching and learning umbrella. So on the next slide, you will see I've just put the 7 strategies down the side. It does say there are 8, but the 8th one is teaching. And I didn't want teaching to be on here. I just wanted us to look at summarising, mapping, drawing, imagining, self-testing, self-explaining and enacting. So in your phases, if you could jot down those 7 strategies for me, please. And then just think, which tool do we use to support the strategies? And how do we use this tool to encourage pupils to categorise, compare, and link their new ideas to their old ones? So remember at the beginning, I asked you to remember those 3 C's: categorise, compare, and link. So the time is 16:33. We are pretty tight for time. So if we do this until 22:05, and then we'll come back together and we'll just really quickly share some ideas. Okay, I will see you in a few moments. I'm here, I'm just turning around so I can talk to Dan and Becky. Just so you know, we're down to the last minute, but don't worry if we don't get this finished, because we can probably do this in our phases as well. Okay, right, we are going to quickly have a look at some of these. So like I say, don't worry if you didn't manage to get through everything, because it's quite big. And we'll just see what we've got so far. So Dan is going to Dan is going to kick us off talking about summarising.
Yeah, so with summarising, the tools that we talked about were graphic schemas and your functional language booklets. And you could use the graphic schema as a prompt to summarise your unit or that lesson. Displays as well. We've got the graphic schemas on the wall, the tiered vocab as well on the wall, and in the books as well. Anything else?
No, I think you basically got it all then.
Cool.
You think of anything, Becky? I can't. Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Anybody want to be brave and talk about one of the others on here? We might not have time to go through everyone tonight. So anyone from Red, do you want to choose one of the?
Sorry, screen block. I don't mind jumping in.
Okay, go on, go for it, Raz. Okay, go on, go for it.
So we were talking about self-testing. So we said about like the retrieval quizzes that we use, and often we'll like use the knowledge organizer and put in gaps where the children will have to retrieve the information.
Yeah.
We also mentioned about blogging stations as well. So the use of blogging stations for self-testing. So maybe us setting questions and then the children will use the blogging stations to answer them questions. Those questions. Retrieval practice cards was another one that we mentioned too.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Lovely. Thank you. And what about somebody from Red? Pick one, Red, whichever one you want.
We said for self-explaining, we said blogging stations again, the talking toolkits to help them self-explain, and then the justification of opinion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking for the self-explaining, I was thinking MEP came to my head. And so when we were talking about metacognition, so how they explain how they've answered a certain type of division, for example, and the type of division.
Eve?
Yes. Yes.
Eve, it's Sarah from Greenblock. In self-explaining, we were also talking about the use of questioning as a tool. So that that prompting and probing questioning and the different types that we've learnt about so far in the CPD. Actually, if you can really target that questioning, you can then draw out more from the children and their self-explanations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You.
Sorry, Eve. To mirror what Sarah just said. We were talking about think, pair, share, and how we use that to gain their understanding and to use types of questioning. Exactly what Sarah just said, basically.
No, you're right, absolutely. And we were saying, when we were talking about the summarising, we were saying about how, because we looked at say it again, say it better. So similar type things, going through the questioning and really reflecting. And you're right, and checking for understanding. Absolute perfect. Lovely, thank you. So we'll move on from this one, but keep this in mind because we can bring it up next CPD when we're all together again. And these were just some of the ideas that I thought about the tools that we use. So of course, we use lots of different styles of graphic organisers to explain when we're teaching, but also for the children to explain. We use the whole part whole models. We carefully map out the sequence of our lessons and our books. We know from the learning scientists the importance of such things as retrieval practice and elaboration, where that would be the children self-explaining using these. We use the self-testing, the retrieval quizzes. And then we start to move on to communication and being to justify our opinion. There it is. We use some of the tools we use would be our justification flow spray, sentence starters, and of course our wonderful functional language booklets. Which is then, if you think back, we've talked about how Marge and motivation, attending, relating fits with the select, organise and integrate model. It also fits with our trivium. Like Dave was saying, the trivium goes throughout. That is like the golden thread, isn't it? And so at the top here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but at the top here, where we have the questions throughout, the small questions throughout, which guide our teaching, gives the children a structure, enables the questioning, the exploring, and the checking for understanding, and builds up the confidence from the recall to the question and explore, and then to the communication at the very end. Well, that doesn't always have to be at the end. Remember, the communication can be throughout. So then we won't go back through these now, but I just want you to think about the first 4 questions that we had at the beginning of the session, and if any of your answers would be different to them now. So if you just have a think about that over the next week or so, please. And that brings us to the end of the part about Marge. So we've done motivation, we've done attend, we've done relate. So next time we come together, we'll talk about generating and evaluating. Have we got any questions or any feedback about what we've done so far, please? If so, unmute and share, please. If not, we'll move on. No? Okay, well, if you do, feel free to
We do. We were just really slow to unmute. We just wanted to say that we actually really enjoyed it today, and we enjoyed having the discussions as a phase and being able to kind of think about what we're currently using in our practice and things. So thanks.
And what we're going to put in next.
Perfect. Thank you. Perfect. Oh, every time I speak, I hear myself like 2 seconds later. It's really weird tonight. Right, so thanks, Sarah. We'll move on now. We're going to just do a little bit of clarification about the phase PowerPoints and the presentations. So I'm really hoping that this will put some people's mind at ease and everybody will go away and know exactly what they're going to do in the next few weeks. So today, Nicola whizzed round everyone and gave everybody a copy of their PowerPoint, 2 per phase, basically, so 1 per year group, and you should have had CPD timetable, and on the flip of that was an explanation about who's doing what. This and then this. So I'll just go through it. So everybody, every phase is doing some sort of research, basically. So I've just gone through and I've just taken blue blocks and showing you basically what yours will look like. So obviously yours will be different because it will say whichever key stage you are and a picture of your block or something's relevant for you. Then the next few slides that it will have are all the backgrounds. So these are the ones that we looked at last week. So everybody's pack will have the rationale. It will have this about moving from the novice to the expert. It will have the trivium overview, and basically that explains how we expect children to be able to do trivium. And so we're doing the same, as Dave said. If the children are doing it, we're also doing it at the same time. Talks about the select, organize and integrate model. Talks about identifying the problem, the agitation and the solution. And so that will be in everybody's pack. So that is basically, that's all your research, all the background of everything that we're doing. It's like your building blocks, basically your foundation. And so then we split it into each section. So remember, this is blue blocks. So blue block will focus on Marge. Green block will focus on feedback. Red block will focus on question and exploring. So because ours is that, we'll start everybody's section. We'll start with this, model and define, and then it will say whatever section you're doing. So for us, obviously it says Marge, motivation. Then everybody's first PowerPoint slide that they're doing asks them to talk about basically the area of study. So you just need to put what your focus is, define what it is, and then describe what the problem is. What happens if things don't ever change? What will happen? And what's the impact? And what would you recommend? So obviously your solution, you will have to add at the end of when you've found out everything. So that you can do this however you want. You can do it as it is now, where it's written area of study, definition, problem, agitation, solution. You could do it as a SWOT analysis, which that's what I had in my mind for Blue Block, to do their SWOT analysis grid and be able to talk through. So it's up to you. You can represent that information however you like, but you need to represent that information, if that makes sense. So that's one slide. Okay. Next, you'll move on to the questioning and exploring. So you might be questioning, exploring, feedback in action, and we'll be doing Marge, motivation. So everybody will have that slide with their subject. Now here it is where we move into the trivium a little bit, where we're comparing and contrasting. So because ours is Marge, it talks about motivational concepts. Yours will talk about concepts of feedback or whatever your subject is. How does it differ basically from what you used before to what you use now? What's the conflict and what are the similarities and the differences? And again, it's up to you how you represent that information. So you could do it, I would personally leave on the trivium T's and the H's so that they're there as a reference for you to refer to. But if you wanted to put in some other kind of graphic representation, then you could do. That's fine. Or if you want to do it in as sentences, it's fine, whatever you want. So that's one slide to talk about the question and explore for that. And then here is your next part of the question and explore. And so what did you do? Tell us about it step by step. So think about your whole part whole here. How would you represent telling us what you did? Then the last set of slides that you'll have are your declare and share, and again with your subject. So this is where you talk about the impact and the evaluation. So again, I've left this blank because I don't want to dictate how you should represent your thoughts. So you could put graphs in here, you could put photos in here, you can put flow sprays, whatever you want, however you want to represent the impact and your evaluation. And then finally, what would you recommend? So what would you recommend for a new teacher coming to our school that would be picking up Marge, that's picking up learning about feedback in action, that's picking up using probing questions, process questions? What would you recommend? Okay. Yes.
Just on that, can you go back a slide?
Yes.
Thank you. This is the difference for me in the next 10 weeks. Sorry. Get out of the cave. Sorry, this is the difference for me on a school that will be spending 10 weeks telling you what to do, or a school that is saying, actually, from a leadership perspective, we want you to innovate, we want you to question and explore, we want you to recommend to us as a leadership team, not just what you'd say to an NQT or a new member of staff, what you'd say to a leadership team about how we move this, say it was motivation, and Marge, how we move that forward as a school. We're interested in collecting that in and having that as part of our guide, if you like, as to where we go next with our IIP and our CPD units of study. So yeah, let's not spoon feed everybody. Let's the team themselves, ourselves, become part of the solution moving forward. So yeah, innovation and creation. So be part of that process, or wait to be told what to do by government. It's up to you.
So that would basically be your PowerPoint, and I gave you a paper copy today. It's also saved on the server for everybody too. That PowerPoint will then be used, so that the PowerPoint will be your basis to make your 8-minute video, which will be pre-recorded and done as a phase. Okay, so you're not doing any extra work. You're not having to create new PowerPoints. You're taking the PowerPoint that you've just filled in, using that structure, and that will be what you present, basically. So some of them will just have to, it's quite a skill, so some will have to condense, because Marge obviously has 3 strands to it. So some of them are slightly denser than others. So it will be a skill to condense it down, but we can do that together. So there's basically about 6 to 8 PowerPoint slides, 8-minute video. We can, I think, doing that is manageable. I think we can do this now. So EYFS, just so everybody knows what everybody will be doing, EYFS are focusing on their curriculum, because they've got a new curriculum going. So EYFS, Carly-Ann is sorting everything out with EYFS. Red block, I'd like you to do questioning and checking for understanding, please. Blue block, we're going to focus on Marge. Green block, focus on feedback. And support centre are also designing a new and exciting curriculum. So support centre and EYFS are a little different in this model. Okay, but if we just focus on red, blue and green at the moment, use the PowerPoint slides that we've just gone through to make your 8-minute pre-recorded video as a phase. So nobody is making a video all by themselves. Nobody's doing a PowerPoint by themselves. It's going to be collaborative. That's the point that we're doing this. We're a team. So have we got, oh, I know what else I wanted to show you. This is really important. So you'll want to know when you're going to be able to do this. So I'm just having a look, where are we now? We are here. So we've just done 28th of April. We've just done attend and relate. Next week, we've got the last one of Marge, generate and evaluate. Then it's the LAT subject group. So after the LAT subject group, you have the 19th of May to prepare the PowerPoint. The 26th of May, the 9th of June, we've put aside to do your report writing. So you have to do this PowerPoint, you have got the 19th of May staff meeting, the 26th of May staff meeting, and the 16th of June staff meeting. Okay, so unless something urgent comes up, we probably won't meet on those days. That will be over to phases to meet to get their PowerPoint sorted. So the PowerPoint I've just gone through that I gave you this afternoon, that is what you'll be doing in those sessions. So you've got 3 1.5 hour sessions to do that in your teams. Now, then on the 23rd of June and the 30th of June, we've got 2 sessions where basically you're practicing and getting your video ready. So your 8-minute presentation. So you've got 2 sessions there. So altogether, you've got 5 staff meeting sessions, 5 times 1.5 hours to do your PowerPoint and get your pre-prepared video ready. On the 7th of July, that's the Wednesday, it's LAT subject groups. So on the Tuesday, that will be, because we'll have done NFER, we'll be data analysing it in phase meetings. And then on our final, well, penultimate, can't get my words out, meeting on the 14th of July, that is when we will start to share people's videos and have a celebration of all the learning that we've done and declare and share. And then if we need to continue into the very last week, we continue to do so. So I really hope that that sounds a lot more manageable and puts people at ease. And this one was just to remind you some of the tools that you have to support you with completing your PowerPoint and getting ready for the presentations. So let's open the floor. Any questions? How can we help?
We know what we do.
Hi, Eve. We just, as Green Block, we just would like to say that we feel a lot more confident now that we know what we're doing. So thank you.
Good. Good. I'm really pleased.
Good. I'm really pleased.
Eve.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I know we're finishing now, but just like to go back to the questions that you've I guess explained some of the answers to. But you know, the key question for me is, what will you do differently tomorrow, based on what you just learned about how children attend, how we as humans attend, and how motivation plays a part in our own learning. So if you can't answer that question with anything different to what you've already done, then perhaps we need to get that feedback, say there's nothing here that's impacted on me at all. That would be very helpful in many ways, but if there are things, I'd like, tweet them, because that helps get other types of feedback and interest. Let us know, and that will help us support you even further. But hopefully that's clarified a lot of the processes moving forward. The next 10 weeks, we will be looking very carefully at planning. We will be looking at the things we've talked about today and how they've impacted on how you design your planning. How have you framed it? How have you set it in different chunks or whatever it might be? We'll be looking at lessons to come, not you as teachers, not me. We're looking at how we deliver lessons, how are we making informed judgments, how are we making choices, and then finally we're looking at assessment and how Trivium impacts on our ability to be able to assess what children can recall, what they can question and explore, how they're making informed and educated decisions, and how they've justified those opinions or decisions in their final justifications of opinion, which we haven't had as many this year because of COVID, but we really do need to get to that point this academic year, for the children's sake, so they can make sense of their learning, if not our own, where we can say we've now mastered that. Thank you very much for your attention, everybody. And I've looked really carefully at the screen, and it looks like everybody has attended. And I know that's hard, and I know Jess is desperate to say something, so I'm going to say, what's up, Jess?
Eve, could I just double check with the 8-minute video and then the presentation on the 14th of July? Is that all recorded? Because I'm hopefully a little bit busy on the 14th of July, but I don't want to let my team down. I mean, I can Teams from the wedding breakfast.
I think I should let you off, but yes, it'll be pre-recorded.
Pre-recorded. Good. I didn't want to, not be in it, because I like being in things.
Of course you do. Actually, we understand, Ellie.
Thanks. Just checking.
Quick plug. Ellie's looking for funds towards her wedding, so she mentions it in case you want to do that.
We're all sorted on that front.
We've all seen you go donate or whatever it's called page, Ellie. We're all putting our tuppence in for you. Don't worry. We'll get you new shoes. Don't worry.
My dad spoken to you by any chance?
I really like your dad. He's so lovely. So he might have done. He might have done. Anyway, thank you very much, Eve. Thanks, Ellie, for that, and thank you everybody for your attention. Have a lovely evening. Really well done. A great midweek session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Bloody clap today.